The Federal Reserve's rate hikes handed a $1.1 trillion windfall to U.S. banks, $1.1 trillion and counting. So says the Financial Times in an article looking at how major banks digested the Fed's rate hikes. In short, they kept them, passing less than a third on to depositors. In case you wonder what the banks do for us in return for the constant bailouts. So what happened is when the Fed hiked rates to try and control the inflation they created, they took interest rates from essentially zero to nearly 5.5% over the course of 2.5 years. Now, in theory, that should have meant banks would also pay you more on your bank deposits. After all, according to the FDIC, in March of 2022, so when the Fed just started hiking rates, banks were paying less than 0.2% on your bank deposits. This is cute considering they were charging over 4% for a mortgage, 3.5% for prime corporate borrowers, and even 1.5% for treasuries. Yes, governments always eat first in the money printing game. So banks were lending your money for up to 4%, and they were giving you 0.125%. Don't worry, though, Fed hikes were on the way. So what happened? Well, 5+ points worth of hikeage, and 2.5 years later, banks are charging a lot more. So mortgages are now 6.5%, prime loans are 8.5%. Even the government has to pay 4% for their money, and yet major banks are paying 1.5 points on deposits. So Bank of America, America's biggest bank, is paying just 1.7%. JP Morgan, America's second biggest bank, is paying 1.5%. So that's 5+ points of hikes, and you got 1 point of it. It's good to be a banker in a central bank cartel. So if it didn't go to depositors, where did all the money go? According to the FT, over $1 trillion went to, quote, pad out profit margins. In fact, according to the FT, these excess payments accounted for half of the total dollars banks brought in over the period. In other words, half of what banks make comes from scraping Fed rate hikes before they get to depositors. Why do they do this? Because they figure you are locked in, and because banks in the U.S. have become a cartel since 2008. So I mentioned in a previous video how bank starts went from around about 100 a year before 2008 to almost zero in the 16 years after. In other words, Wall Street used 2008 to outlaw the competition by artfully rewriting bank regulation. In case you were under the impression that regulations exist to protect you, no, they exist to fleece you. So what's next? Brought to you by Unchained.com. With the Fed cutting rates, Wall Street is poised to slash even those measly deposit rates, as 1.5. As the FT puts it, they're slow to boost what they pay on deposits, but they are very fast to cut. Indeed, as smaller banks fail and new competition fails to materialize, because Wall Street outlawed it, expect the fleecing by major banks to get worse. Meanwhile, rate cuts themselves will pump the next windfall for banks in the form of trillions of freshly printed money. So can the financial system be fixed so it's not heads I win, tails you lose? Sure, get rid of the Fed and the permanent bailouts, the money printing, and the exorbitant privileges for Wall Street. Until then, it is rip-offs as far as the eye can see. Okay, we'll be watching. See you next time.